I think you could see from the difficulty of corralling everyone to be sitting down again that there's a new sense of optimism in this room and actually indeed around the country. In just 7 weeks in the role, Prime Minister, the impact you have had on national sentiment is almost unparalleled. You have given us... You have given us the permission to have conversations about things that really matter to people and helped, through your own example, to make those conversations positive. For some time now, the Business Council has been trying to start a conversation around fostering an innovation-capable economy to drive the next decade of growth and job creation. We now have permission to build on what we've been saying about the impact of disruptive forces, about keeping Australia competitive in a vastly more competitive global economy, and about the role of livable cities, a topic on which Lucy Turnbull is an acknowledged leader. There is also a new sentiment that leadership is a collective responsibility. In this context, the National Reform Summit demonstrated a promising level of engagement, dialogue, and agreement around fundamental national objectives and directions for change. We're absolutely delighted that a number of the core participants in the summit are here tonight, including Cassandra Goldie, Jed Carney and Dave Oliver, as well as the editor of one of the two supporting newspapers, Michael Stutchbury from the Australian Financial Review. In your first month in the role, Prime Minister, you brought the summit participants back to create momentum and specifically to build on the areas of agreement and to work through the points of difference. This early initiative has galvanised the positive sentiment. The most important outcome of the summit and our meeting with you was the collective agreement among disparate groups around two things. One, that the central objective of the policy reform areas debated at the summit is economic growth. And two, that the way to achieve that growth is through innovation. Representatives of the community sector, the labour movement and businesses of all sizes jointly acknowledged that we will not be serving the interests of our diverse constituencies if we don't align our efforts to create an innovation-capable economy. However, it's important that we get the innovation conversation right. We must move on from a fundamental misconception in Australia that innovation policy is somewhat a standalone activity or a government program, when the real task is to unlock the innovation capability of the whole economy by mobilising key elements such as skills, physical infrastructure and knowledge infrastructure, and by having regulation which enables and incentivises, trade agreements which underpin our participation in global supply chains, and a government acting as a demanding customer in its delivery of services. Innovation isn't a program that can be delivered, it's the result of a thoughtfully designed system. It's a complex system, replete with interdependencies, unpredictability, and deep, long-term causal loops. But Prime Minister, you have significant experience in dealing with complex systems, whether it be the Murray-Darling Basin or, dare I say, the NBN. This experience gives you an extraordinary set of credentials to use the government's upcoming innovation statement to draw together the interdependencies, incentives and signals which characterise this system and to identify opportunities for better mobilising key elements. You have already shone light on one area of white space, and that's the importance of mobilising entrepreneurship and start-up ventures. This is long overdue. Of course, it's also essential that established businesses, large and small, continue to invest in innovation and also to recognise that not all of innovation is technology-based. Business systems and processes matter too. This means taking account of what drives businesses to invest and innovate, including regulation, and crucially, the broader tax system, including the tax rate. And while absolutely recognising the critical importance of personal income tax reform, the experience of other countries has shown that nothing will stimulate innovation and growth more than a reduction in the tax rate for all businesses as part of a broader tax reform agenda. The income tax rate really matters, whether personal or business. If there is no growth dividend from tax reform, it will be a missed opportunity. We run the risk of undertaking a tax mix change that simply underwrites increased spending. This is not the path to sustained growth and economic prosperity. And as a final comment on tax reform, I'd like to thank the Prime Minister, the Treasurer, the South Australian Premier Jay Weatherill, who, along with New South Wales Premier Mike Baird, are enabling the community to have a mature, informed conversation about the reform of a system that was built for a different era and a different world. Before introducing the Prime Minister, let me take a moment to thank a few people. Could I thank the BCA board and acknowledge two outstanding directors who retired from the board today? That's Gail Kelly and Grant King. And to welcome our new directors, Alison Watkins and Ian Narev. I would also like to thank Jennifer for another year of exceptional service to the BCA and to the nation. Jennifer and her small team, and I emphasise small, we're talking fewer than 30 people, cover a daunting range of policy areas, adding fresh perspectives, finding new approaches to old debates, and literally sitting down with policymakers to work through the detail and the implications of policy proposals. Jennifer's leadership of this team is extraordinary, and it's an absolute privilege to be able to work with her. It's now my great pleasure to introduce the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, having worked closely with you, most recently in the communications portfolio, I have seen you operating with a blend of vision and pragmatism. And this is a combination that can take this country forward to realise its potential, gradually and systematically over what must be a 10-year period of policy transition. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me now in welcoming the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, to the stage.
Well, Catherine, thank you so much for that very generous, too generous introduction. And can I just say that it is fantastic to be on a unity ticket with you, and I know with all of your colleagues in the BCA in favour of innovation. And Catherine said something about innovation being for the whole of the economy, and that is a fundamental point. A lot of people think that innovation is about a couple of people, in a garage and someone in their parents' garage coming up with a fantastic new application. And that type of startup is a big part of the innovation ecosystem, big part of the economy. As I was saying this morning in Melbourne, speaking to the Melbourne Institute, when you think about the big firms, the big companies that have essentially recreated a digital world or reformed our world in the digital space, many of them, if not most of them, if they were humans, would still be at school. Google itself, the giant Google, dominating the landscape, 17 years old. And the elder statesmen of the digital age, Microsoft and Apple, are 40 and 39 respectively. And I'm sure there's lots of people here who are younger than that. The reality is that we're living in a world with a pace of change that is utterly unprecedented. And we do need to draw breath occasionally and reflect on it. In 40 years ago, China barely participated in the global economy. Now it is the world's single largest national economy. China's online market, its online commerce market, is larger in dollar terms than that of the United States. And of course, has a lot further to go. The transformation of the middle class in Asia is extraordinary. This, if you believe Angus Maddison's great work that he did for the OECD years ago about economies over millennia, this is the first time for 300 years that half of the world's middle class are living in Asia. And that is as of right now in 2015. And of course, that simply because of population, because of the inexorable consequences of demography, that huge consumer mass will be of middle-class consumers will be dominated by the big Asian economies. So the opportunities for us are absolutely extraordinary. This has never been a better time to be an Australian. There has never been a better time to be an Australian business. There has never been a more exciting time for Australia. The opportunities are enormous, and the only barriers, the only constraints, the only limitations we have, my friends, are our own imagination or our own enterprise. It is all there. We have, and I'm appropriating Andrew Robb's great diplomacy, we have opened up those economies in a way that it also is unprecedented in our history. The China-Australia Free Trade Agreement is the best free trade agreement, the highest quality free trade agreement China has ever entered into. And only last week I was in South Australia and Tasmania talking to so many people, so many businesses, mostly businesses much smaller than those you represent, who are seeing the benefits of that, particularly in food and wine. The Premier of South Australia, Jay Weatherill, is here and would understand the impact that China market is having on his own state. And, you know, turning to South Australia for a moment, in deference to the Premier, and of course I acknowledge all the other distinguished parliamentarians here, especially my colleagues. I see the Cabinet Secretary, Arthur Sinodinos, there. He was a pillar of the Howard government. He's now positively a flying buttress of the Turnbull government. The reincorporated. Lucy would approve of that, a bit of adaptive reuse from an architectural point of view. But Jay Weatherill would understand this, as would all the South Australians. If you said 85-year-old manufacturing business in Adelaide, most people would think, gosh, that sounds a bit grim. And there are many examples of this. I am singling this company out, but it is a good example. A company 85 years old, making plumbing fittings, manufacturing company in Adelaide, Philmac. It is a leading exporter in its niche, in a rather specialised niche, making gate valves and plumbing fittings. It employs nearly 300 people. It's about to employ another 30. And you can see that that's a company which is driven by innovation. So you don't have to be, and this gets back to Catherine's point, you don't have to be a start-up by some brilliant young engineers from the university to be an innovative company. What we need across the nation, across the corporate world, across the world of government, is a change to the culture that recognises that in an age of rapid, unprecedented change, in an age of disruption, in an age of transition, we need to be thoroughly agile. We need to be prepared at every stage to say the way we did things yesterday or last week is not the way we'll do them in the future. That means organisations need to be much less hierarchical. They cannot be blame-based. You have to, as chief executives or senior executives, you've got to encourage the people that work for you to challenge you. You've got to ensure that you're always testing existing practices. You know, the old phrase, not invented here, we've always done it that way, is disastrous. It's always important to be courteous, of course, but in a disruptive age of rapid change, deference, if overdone, can be death from a corporate point of view. Change is rapid. We've got to treat volatility as our friend, not as our foe. Now, the government's objectives in terms of its economic policy are very simple, very easily stated. We need to ensure that Australia remains a high-wage, generous social welfare net first world economy. We need to ensure that our opportunities increase, our horizons expand, our children and our grandchildren can have better jobs, more exciting jobs, bigger opportunities than we have had. And to do that, it is perfectly plain that we have to be more innovative, more technologically advanced, more enterprising, more competitive, more productive. That much is absolutely clear. There is no room for complacency. The next lift in national income, we all understand, has to come from productivity. And in a sense, innovation is another word for productivity. It will lead to greater productivity. Now, for many years, the perception among business is that our political processes have not delivered as promised, that parliaments don't work as they should, that necessary reform has hit the wall, that the system is almost dysfunctional. I want to say to you tonight emphatically that the business of government is to get things done. Australians expect their elected representatives to deliver practical, common-sense policy to improve economic security and the general well-being of the nation. We need to be thoroughly pragmatic. We have to be open-minded and practical, businesslike. If there are obstacles in the Parliament that can be cleared through sensible negotiation, then we should engage constructively and overcome those obstacles, as we did to secure the passage through the House of the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement legislation. If it means reaching across the aisle for bipartisanship, then we should do that too. Businesses should not be afraid to invest because of some perceived political risk. Our government, any government, should push for coherence and consensus wherever we can. We are expected to govern. We're expected to deliver. Ideology is no substitute for results. So we need to get the economic and regulatory settings right so that we can empower, enable rather than impede the spirit of your and so many other businesses, smaller and younger than yours. We want to encourage their spirit of entrepreneurship. Now, we all understand that there are big challenges out there. The global economy has been unable to sustain the stronger growth we'd hoped for after the GFC. The IMF has forecast global growth of 3.1% in 2015 compared to the pre-GFC average of 4.2%. As a result of the inevitable decline in commodity prices, we've seen major falls in our terms of trade, some 30% from their peak. And although average incomes are around 14% higher in real terms than they were at the beginning of the mining boom, we simply can no longer rely on increases in our terms of trade to drive future income growth. And so government and businesses together need to do the hard work to drive the productivity growth that in future years and in future generations will forge continued improvements in Australian living standards. We, the governments, need to be making the right investments in key infrastructure. We need to make those investments in a creative and imaginative way. We need to be prepared to invest, simply not make grants. The federal government should adopt a much more engaged and involved approach to infrastructure. That's why I've appointed a cities minister. That's why we will be taking a partnership role, a supportive role, to ensure that our cities, where most of our Australians live and hence where most of our GDP is developed or is created, we need to make sure that we've got a creative and positive role there as well. So we want to focus then on the measures that will enable us to achieve those goals. And we'll have more to say about that with our innovation and science agenda to be released next month, not very long away from now. Now, I believe that we're in a world of, as I said earlier, of extraordinary opportunities. if you take the Brookings Institution's estimates, these, by 2021, there could be more than 2 billion people in middle-class households in Asia. Now, let's just reflect for a moment on the opportunity in China. And I know we all spend far too much time talking about China as opposed to other markets, but the observations about China apply to many other countries in the region. China, as we know, has seen extraordinary economic growth, which has been largely fuelled by policy-driven investment. And that was the product of financial repression. Interest rates were kept low, both for depositors, hence repressing household incomes, making money cheaper, hence you got enormous levels of investment, very rapid levels of investment, rapid rate of investment and very high levels as a percentage of GDP. The government has been trying to rebalance back to consumption for many years. At least the last 2 5-year plans have set that as a policy. But it is now starting to happen. As China moves to a more conventional share of consumption in their GDP, that opportunity for us is simply gigantic. Now, we need to recognise that that will mean that our exports into that market will be much more diverse than they have been in the past. They will still no doubt be dominated by a number of large commodities, but the range of services, of consumer goods, of food and wine and numerous other products, from everything from tourism to education to architectural design services, will be available there. And so this is an extraordinary opportunity for us. Now, how do we make sure that we're able to do that? We need to have a much more competitive economy. We need to be vastly more agile and adaptive. But we need to do so in a way, changes that we make need to be undertaken in a way that is seen as absolutely fair. And I made this point in Melbourne this morning. There is a big debate going on about the tax system, and that's good. We have quite deliberately not played the rule-in, rule-out game that has been a feature of discussions before, because we want the public to understand that everything is on the table, that the government is approaching these issues in a genuine, open-minded and consultative way. We want to make sure that by consulting as widely as we can, we come to the right decisions, to the right judgments. And in doing so, we build confidence in the reform process. You see, we're prone as business people, as politicians, as economists, to talk about reform in abstract terms, as though it was a virtue in itself. Reform is simply a means to an end. It simply is a means of ensuring that we are able to compete in the years ahead, that we're able to take advantage of those opportunities. And therefore it needs to have very deep public support. You cannot spring change on people as a surprise. You need to build that strong constituency. So you have to have, on the one hand, an acceptance, an understanding that the purpose of reform is to create better opportunities in the future, better jobs, greater opportunities for investment, greater prosperity, greater economic security. That, if you like, is your motive. That's got to be accepted. But then you need to ensure that people understand you've gone about it in an open-minded and thoughtful and consultative way. And that's why I was delighted to meet with my colleagues, with the leading participants in the National Reform Summit, business groups, the ACTU, ACOS, right across the board. The government should be seen to be engaging as widely as possible. And that's why we welcome every contribution to this debate, even if it's critical, even if it's saying the government is planning to do X and that's a bad idea. Well, that's fine. The more discussion there is, the more informed and comfortable people will be that we are having a very sensible and serious look at things. Now, I talked earlier about business and how big business and even old businesses can be transformed by innovation. The same is true with government. Using technology to help businesses and consumers interact with government more easily and more effectively is an absolute no-brainer. And so I established in my own department, obviously when I say I did, the government did, but it was in the communications department, now in PM&C, the Digital Transformation Office, whose role it is to ensure that by 2017, all frequently performed transactions with government can be undertaken on digital platforms, end to end. That will, in due course, save money for government, but it will be genuinely transformative in terms of the way businesses interact with government. And our goal, and I say this knowing I have a Premier in the audience, our goal is to ensure that citizens, when they deal with government, can deal with all levels of government. When they provide, for example, something as simple as their change of address, why do they have to provide it to one agency after another, to one government after another? Tell me once should be a principle that applies right across government. We should be able to recognise that the fascinating constitutional differences between local government, state government and federal government, obscure and unclear and ambiguous as they often are of absolutely no interest to citizens and most businesses. They want results. That's why I always say, when you're campaigning to be elected as a federal member of parliament, you'll find that most people you meet will raise local government matters with you. Now, as the first man to be the Lady Mayoress of Sydney, you can imagine I have a very deep appreciation of local government. And I always say, if you want to limit your prospects of election, give your would-be constituent a lecture on constitutional law. If you want to secure your election, say to your constituent when they ask you as a federal candidate about the cracks in the pavement or the rubbish collection, say, I know the Mayor, I will get onto her as quickly as possible and it'll be sorted out. So the reality is that we should, while respecting the important roles of government, we should, in terms of our interface with the public, be able to make it far more seamless. And that's why we will make our platforms, whether it is MyGov or any other digital platforms that we develop as part of the DTO's work, we will make that available to state and local governments for free. So if they want to onboard, they can do so. We want more Australians, whether they're businesses or citizens, or private citizens if you like, to be able to deal with government more in a more straightforward way. Now let me say a little bit about tax, and I noticed that Alan Madden was the first person to raise tax tonight, so it's obviously a key issue. The fundamental objective of the tax system, as we know, is to raise the money needed for government. But it is a very big lever. I mean, the tax commissioner is in many respects the largest single shareholder in many Australian businesses in a practical sense. So it is absolutely critical that the tax system has the minimum deadweight loss, as the economists would say, the minimum break on economic activity. So we have to always ask ourselves and be prepared to always re-examine the tax system and the way it interacts with superannuation and with transfer payments and so forth. We have to always ask, are we able to achieve our objective of raising the money we need in a more efficient way? That does not mean raising more money. It means doing so in a way that backs business, backs enterprise, backs work, backs investment, rather than holding it back. And as Catherine said at the outset, circumstances change all the time. We have a lot of measures, a lot of taxes, particularly at the state level, which are very old and were imposed or created in a very different world. Now, it's often said that an old tax is a good tax. That's probably true in some respects from an administrative point of view, but in practical terms, in 2015, we have to be prepared to re-examine all of these measures and ask it whether it is contributing to our prosperity or whether it is, in one form or another, holding it back. And that is what we're undertaking at the moment. We are looking at every aspect of the tax system, of savings, transfer payments, right across the board, with the aim of ensuring that we can deliver the revenues government needs, but does so in a way that will contribute materially to the growth of our economy and the opportunities for Australians. Now, it's absolutely vital that as we do that, we do so in partnership with the rest of the community, with business, with organised labour, with the organisations like ACOS. It is important that we are seen to be and are in fact genuinely consultative. And you've seen in the short time that I've been Prime Minister that I've reached out to many of you in this room, often with very different interests, very different agendas, to hear what you've got to say, because we can always draw something from it. The critical thing is that we get to the right decision and that we do so in a way that is seen as legitimate. And it is that consultation, that engagement, that drives the legitimacy. Nobody knows for sure what the perfect policy will be. There probably is no perfect policy. Only time will tell. But nothing gives a policy greater legitimacy than the sense that everybody has been heard, that all of the claims, all of the stakeholders, all of the interests, all of the arguments have been listened to. So the government I'm leading, in summary, is one that is committed to growth, is determined to ensure that we equip ourselves to prosper in a much more competitive world, in a world that has vastly greater opportunities, in a world of unprecedentedly rapid change. We want Australia to be more agile, more innovative, more productive, as I've said and as Catherine has said, and as I know you want it to be too. And so we need your help, your ideas, and not just from the BCA members, but from all of the other interests that are here in this room. We need your help to ensure that we make the right decisions. We are absolutely committed to that task. Remember the goal, Australia, a high-wage, generous social welfare net economy, first world economy, a country that is seen as being open to opportunity but thoroughly fair, that backs and encourages those who want to get ahead, but also looks after those who, for one reason or another, are not able to. That's been our unique success in years gone by. In a different world, in a rapidly changing world, we need to be more agile to maintain those great Australian values. I know that we can count on not just the support, but the help, the ideas, the counsel of everyone in this room to ensure that we can do that in the years ahead. Thank you very much.